Rain drummed on the black umbrellas of the crowd. Lorraine Cardwell watched as the coffin containing her grandfather's body was lowered and felt as if the ground was falling away beneath her feet. Garrett Cardwell, the man who had built one of the largest construction companies in the region from scratch, had passed away 3 days earlier. People dressed in black stood around her, company employees, business partners, local officials. Many were genuinely grieving. For Ashfield, Garrett's loss was a tangible blow. Lori smoothed a stray strand of dark hair and felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning around, she saw Tessa, her childhood friend, who had flown in from a neighboring state to support her. "How are you holding up?" Tessa asked quietly. "I'm fine," Lori lied, swallowing the lump in her throat. In reality, she felt devastated. Her grandfather had been her rock since her father died 12 years ago. He had taught her everything she knew about business, about life, about how to stand on her own 2 feet. Lori glanced briefly at her mother. Veronica Hasing, née Cardwell, stood next to her husband Roland. Elegant, tall, with perfect hair that even the rain couldn't ruin, she looked more upset than grief-stricken. Roland, a stocky man with receding hair and attentive eyes, held an umbrella over them both. His face was stony, but Lori noticed him periodically glancing appraisingly at those present, as if counting potential allies. Memories came flooding back. Lori remembered her grandfather picking her up from school in his old pickup truck when her mother was too busy. He always found time, despite running a multi-million-dollar business. "The company isn't going anywhere in a couple of hours, Lori Birdie, but your childhood is fleeting," he would say as they drove off for ice cream. After her father died when she was 14, it was her grandfather who prevented her from withdrawing into herself. He took her to construction sites, showed her how to read blueprints, and explained the intricacies of running a business. "One day, all this will be yours, Lori. You need to be ready." And then Roland appeared. He was a financial consultant hired to optimize some of the company's processes. At first, Lori even liked his business approach and concrete suggestions. But when, 6 months after they met, he started dating her mother, something inside her became alarmed. It was too fast, too convenient. Veronica, who had lost her husband, seemed to find comfort in Roland's arms. Just 8 months later, they were married. Lori was 16 at the time, and she felt that her mother was betraying her father's memory. A rift formed between them, which only widened over time. "It's time," Tessa whispered, interrupting Lori's memories. The ceremony was over. People began to disperse. Many approached Lori to offer their condolences and talk about what a wonderful man her grandfather had been. She nodded and thanked them, but the words went in one ear and out the other. She still couldn't comprehend what was happening. "Lauren," her mother's voice brought her out of her stupor, "we're going home. Everything is ready for the wake." Lori nodded without looking at her. For the past year, they had mostly communicated at family events. After college, Lori returned to Ashfield and started working for her grandfather's company, but she lived separately in a small apartment in the city center. Her mother disapproved of her decision to start at the bottom, as Lori put it. Roland called it senseless self-torture and offered her a seat on the board of directors, but Lori refused. She wanted to earn the respect of her employees, not have everything handed to her on a silver platter. The Cardwell home, a huge Victorian mansion on a hill overlooking the city, was filled with people. Lori felt both at home and like a stranger there. After her mother's wedding and Roland's move, the atmosphere changed. There were new paintings, new furniture, even the smell was different. Expensive scented candles instead of the familiar smell of her grandfather's tobacco and old books. Lori stood at the living room window, watching Roland talk to the mayor and the head of the local bank. They nodded periodically and glanced in her direction. "Here." Tessa handed her a glass of whiskey. "You need this." "Thanks." Lori took a sip and grimaced. "I still can't believe it. He seemed so indestructible." "Cancer doesn't choose," Tessa said quietly. "But 3 months. It was too fast." Lori nodded. Her grandfather had been diagnosed just 3 months ago, and despite treatment at the best clinic in the state, the disease had progressed rapidly. He had remained conscious until the last day, but had been bedridden for the last 2 weeks. "You know what's strange?" Lori said. staring at the amber liquid in her glass. "He didn't talk to me about the company. All these years he kept saying he was preparing me, and when the time came, nothing. Not a word about what would happen next." "Maybe he just didn't want to burden you," Tessa suggested. "Maybe," Lori replied uncertainly. "But that's not like him. He was always straightforward." "Say what you think and think what you say," was his favorite phrase. Out of the corner of her eye, Lori noticed Roland separate himself from the group of men and head toward a small raised platform in the corner of the living room where the piano usually stood. Someone tapped a fork on a glass, signaling for silence. Gradually, the conversations died down. "Friends, colleagues, family," Roland began, looking around at the assembled crowd. "We are gathered here to honor the memory of an outstanding man, Garrett Cardwell." Lori tensed. Something in Roland's tone seemed insincere, as if he were reciting a memorized speech. "Garrett didn't just build a company," Roland continued. "He built a legacy. Cardwell Construction employs more than 500 people in our city, participates in charitable projects, and supports local initiatives." Lori's stepfather paused as if gathering his thoughts. "In these difficult times, many of you are wondering about the future of the company. I want to assure everyone here that Cardwell Construction will continue to operate in the same spirit and with the same values that Garrett established." Lori frowned. Why was he talking about this now? And why did he sound like he had already made a decision? After much thought and family discussion, Roland placed his hand on Veronica's shoulder as she approached. "Veronica and I have come to the conclusion that in order to preserve Garrett's legacy, I should take over the management of the company." A quiet murmur swept through the room. Lori felt the blood rush to her face. Family discussions? What is he talking about? No one discussed anything with her. "As Cardwell Construction's chief financial advisor for the past 8 years, Roland continued, not noticing or ignoring Lori's reaction, "I am familiar with all aspects of the business and am ready to take on this responsibility." "What nonsense!" Lori whispered, clenching her glass so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Lori," Tessa whispered warningly, but it was too late. "Excuse me," Lori said loudly, taking a step forward. "What family discussions? No one discussed anything with me." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Veronica smiled tensely. "Lorraine, dear, this is not the time or place." "When is the time, Mom?" Lori interrupted. "When you and Roland have decided everything. Grandpa prepared me to run the company my whole life. I've worked there for the last 4 years, starting at the bottom, to understand every aspect of the business." Roland remained calm, but Lori saw the muscle in his jaw twitch. "Lorraine, I understand your frustration," he said in the tone he usually used with disobedient contractors. "But running a company of this size requires experience that comes with age. Your grandfather appreciated your enthusiasm, but he also understood the need for experienced leadership during this transition period." "Don't speak for my grandfather," Lori snapped. "You have no idea what he wanted." "Lorraine," Veronica exclaimed, "stop this at once. You're embarrassing yourself in front of everyone." Lori glanced around the room. Some guests were looking at the floor, others were watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. Among them, she noticed Malcolm Pierce, the family lawyer, who unexpectedly winked at her. It was so inappropriate that Lori was taken aback for a moment. The will be read tomorrow at my office," Malcolm said calmly, addressing everyone present. "I think it will clear up a lot of questions. Now, perhaps we should return to the original purpose of our gathering, to honor Garrett's memory." Roland nodded, but Lori saw irritation in his eyes. "Of course, Malcolm, you're right." He turned back to the guests and continued talking about Garrett's achievements, but Lori was no longer listening. Her attention was drawn to Malcolm's gesture, inviting her to step into the next room. "I apologize for that scene," the lawyer said when they were alone in her grandfather's office, "but I couldn't let Roland continue in that vein." "What's going on, Malcolm?" Lori asked. "Why are they so sure? Did Grandpa talk to you about his plans?" Malcolm, an elderly man with piercing eyes behind horn-rimmed glasses, studied her face for a moment. "I can't reveal any details until the official announcement," he finally said, "but I will tell you this. Your grandfather was a very wise man." And very thoughtful. What does that mean? It means you should be in my office tomorrow at 10 a.m., Malcolm replied. And if I may offer some advice, don't argue with Roland anymore today. Let him think he won. Lori wanted to ask more questions, but the office door opened and Veronica entered. Her face was tense. There you are, she said, ignoring Malcolm. We need to talk. The lawyer nodded tactfully to both women and left the room, closing the door firmly behind him. What was that? Veronica asked coldly as soon as they were alone. How could you make such a scene at your grandfather's memorial service? How could you and Roland make statements about the future of the company without discussing it with me? Lori retorted. Grandpa always said, Enough about what Grandpa said, her mother interrupted. Garrett always spoiled you, filled your head with unrealistic ideas. The truth is you're not ready to run a company of this size. You're too young, too inexperienced. And Roland is the perfect candidate? A man who joined the company only 8 years ago? Veronica pursed her lips. Roland has 20 years of experience in financial management. He saved the company from many of your grandfather's rash decisions. What decisions? Lori exclaimed indignantly. Cardwell Construction flourished under my grandfather's leadership. There's a lot you don't know, Veronica snapped. There have been difficulties in recent years. And don't forget that I'm a Cardwell too. This is my company too. You've never been interested in business, Lori exclaimed. You've always been busy with your charity dinners and tennis tournaments. Veronica's face contorted with anger. Don't you dare talk to me like that. I'm still your mother. Then start acting like one, not like Roland's puppet. Veronica raised her hand but stopped it in midair. They both froze, shocked by what had almost happened. I'm sorry, Veronica said quietly, lowering her hand. I didn't mean to. It's okay, Lori replied, although it was far from it. Let's just get through this day. Tomorrow the will be read and everything will be clear. Veronica nodded, but Lori saw in her eyes that she was certain the will would only confirm her and Roland's plans. Something told Lori that her mother knew more than she was saying. Returning to the living room, Lori noticed that the atmosphere had changed. People had broken into small groups, talking quietly. Many glanced furtively in her direction. Obviously, the scene with Roland had become the main topic of discussion. Is everything okay? Tessa asked as she approached. I don't know, Lori replied honestly. I feel like something's wrong. They seem too sure of themselves. Maybe they really did discuss it with your grandfather? Lori shook her head. Grandpa would have told me. He's always been honest with me. She looked around the room, noticing Roland talking quietly with 2 members of the Cardwell Construction Board of Directors. Her mother stood nearby, occasionally adding something to his comments. They looked like the perfect team, deciding the fate of the company her grandfather had built his entire life. Whatever happens tomorrow, Lori said firmly, I won't let them destroy what my grandfather created, even if I have to fight my own mother. Malcolm Pierce's office was located in an old 2-story red brick building in the business center of Ashfield. Lori arrived 10 minutes early and now sat in the reception area, nervously tapping her fingers on the armrest of the chair. She had hardly slept that night, replaying yesterday's events in her head and trying to imagine what was written in her grandfather's will. Coffee? Asked the secretary, a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile. No, thank you, replied Lori. Her stomach was in knots from nervousness, and she doubted she could swallow anything. The office door opened and Malcolm Pierce appeared. Despite being over 60, he stood straight and confident. Today, he was wearing a dark blue suit and a tie with a small geometric pattern, an outfit that, according to her grandfather, the lawyer only wore for particularly important meetings. Lorraine, it's good to see you, he said, shaking her hand. Please come in. The others will be here shortly. Malcolm's office looked exactly as you would expect a lawyer with 30 years' experience to have. A massive dark wood desk, walls lined with bookcases, ancient volumes of legislation, and collections of case law. In the center of the room stood a large oval conference table. How are you feeling? Malcolm asked when they sat down. Honestly, like everything is falling apart, Lori admitted. Roland's statement yesterday. I wasn't ready for that. The lawyer nodded sympathetically. Your grandfather saw something like this coming. He knew people well. Is that why you winked at me yesterday? Because you knew that Grandpa really left the company to me? Malcolm smiled. I can't say anything until the will is officially announced, but your grandfather was very proud of you, Lori. He always talked about how you absorbed all his lessons, how you grasped complex business processes on the fly. Lori felt a lump rise in her throat. In the 4 years she had worked for her grandfather's company, she had indeed learned a lot. Starting as an assistant foreman on construction sites, where she was often not taken seriously because of her last name and gender, she gradually earned the respect of her colleagues. She then worked in the purchasing department, then in the design department, and for the last year in the finance department, under Roland's direct supervision, which was challenging but extremely useful. Her grandfather insisted on this experience, saying that it is in finance that all the company's skeletons are buried. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. The secretary announced the arrival of the other meeting participants. Veronica and Roland Heising entered the office, followed by Frank Larson, Cardwell Construction's chief legal counsel, and Deborah Fletcher, the company's executive director. The last to arrive was an elderly woman whom Lori did not immediately recognize. Mrs. Wilcox, Malcolm introduced her. She has been the Cardwell family's housekeeper for the last 30 years. Garrett asked her to be present at the reading of the will. Mrs. Wilcox, a short woman with piercing eyes, nodded to those present and sat down in a chair next to Lori. "Good morning, Miss Lorraine," she said quietly. "Mr. Garrett always said you were the spitting image of your father, just as determined and fair." Lori smiled gratefully. She knew the housekeeper was devoted to her grandfather and appreciated her presence as additional moral support. Veronica and Roland took their seats across from them. Lori's mother looked impeccable as always. Her blonde hair was carefully styled, her makeup subtle, and she wore a strict black suit. Roland, in a dark gray suit and burgundy tie, exuded confidence, but Lori noticed that he was nervously adjusting his cuffs, a gesture he made when he was particularly tense. "Thank you all for your punctuality," Malcolm began when everyone had seated themselves. "We are gathered here to announce the last will and testament of Garrett James Cardwell. I will read the document in its entirety, without abridgment, as required by law. Please refrain from commenting until the reading is complete." He opened the black folder in front of him and took out several pages, bound and stamped. "I, Garrett James Cardwell, being of sound mind and memory, hereby express my last will and testament." Lori listened to the standard legal wording, mentally preparing herself for what would follow. Malcolm read the sections of the will concerning charitable donations and inheritances for longtime employees, including Mrs. Wilcox, to whom her grandfather had left a substantial sum and a small house on the outskirts of town that had belonged to the family. "As for my principal estate," Malcolm continued, "I dispose of it as follows. I bequeath to my granddaughter, Lorraine Evelyn Cardwell, the controlling interest in Cardwell Construction, comprising 60% of the capital stock." Roland sat up straight, his face frozen. Veronica paled and grabbed the edge of the table. "Provided that she personally manages the company for at least 5 years from the date of inheritance. If Lorraine refuses this condition, the shares will be sold at market value, and the proceeds will be donated to the Ashfield Orphanage Charity Fund." Lori felt a mixture of relief and shock. She had expected her grandfather to leave her a share in the company, but a controlling stake. That meant complete control over the business and complete responsibility. "The remaining 40% of the shares shall be divided as follows: 20% to my daughter Veronica Heising, 10% to the employees of Cardwell Construction through an equity participation program, and 10% to a trust fund, the proceeds of which will be used to develop educational programs in Ashfield." Lori looked at her mother. Veronica looked shocked and confused. She had obviously expected a completely different distribution. The Cardwell family home at 38 Ridgewood Drive, including all the surrounding land, furniture, and artwork, I bequeath to my granddaughter, Lorraine Evelyn Cardwell. This was unexpected. Lori glanced at Roland. He looked as if he had been punched in the gut. The house was not just a home, It was a status symbol in Ashfield, a historic mansion that had been passed down through the family for generations. To my daughter, Veronica Hasing, I leave the sum of $5 million, as well as my late wife Eleanor's jewelry collection, on the condition that Veronica vacates the family home within 30 days of the reading of this will. Veronica let out a strangled sound, something between a sigh and a moan. Roland put his hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away, shaking it off. Malcolm continued reading, but Laurie could barely hear the rest of the will. Her thoughts revolved around one thing. Why had her grandfather made this decision? Why had he left the house to her and not to her mother? And why had he imposed such a harsh condition on Veronica? In closing, Malcolm's voice brought her back to reality. I would like to address my loved ones personally. Veronica, my daughter, I have always loved you, but we never understood each other. I hope you find happiness. Lorraine, my granddaughter, you have always been my pride. I believe that you will preserve and build on what your grandfather and great-grandfather created. Cardwell Construction is not just a business. It is a legacy, a responsibility to the people who work for the company and to the city we all love. Cherish that legacy as you would cherish your loved ones. Malcolm closed the folder and looked at those present. This concludes the reading of the last will and testament of Garrett James Cardwell. A heavy silence hung in the office, broken first by Veronica. This must be some kind of mistake, she said, turning to Malcolm. Garrett he didn't discuss this decision with me. The will was drawn up according to all the rules, the lawyer replied calmly. It was signed by Garrett in the presence of 2 witnesses who confirmed his legal capacity. I have copies of the documents in my office. I can provide them upon request. When was the will drawn up? Roland asked, trying to remain calm, but Laurie could see the tension in his face. 9 months ago, Malcolm replied. Last August. Roland and Veronica exchanged quick glances. Laurie remembered that it was around that time that Roland had begun to actively promote the idea of restructuring the company, which had led to several tense meetings with her grandfather. We can contest that, Roland said, turning to Veronica, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Garrett hasn't always been able to assess the situation adequately in recent years. We can prove. I would strongly advise against that course of action, Mr. Hasing, Malcolm interrupted, a steely note creeping into his voice. Contesting a will is a long and expensive process, with minimal chances of success in this case. Besides, he glanced meaningfully at Roland. Garrett anticipated this possibility and left additional documents that will only be disclosed in the event of a court case. Silence fell over the office. Laurie saw Roland clench his fists. Veronica looked as if she were about to cry, but she held back. Now is not the time for rash decisions, Malcolm said in a conciliatory tone. I suggest we all take a break, think about the situation, and meet in a few days to discuss specific steps for the transfer of control. That's not necessary, Veronica replied coldly, standing up. My daughter made it clear yesterday that she is independent and self-sufficient. Let her prove it. She turned to Laurie. Consider this your first lesson in the business world. Never trust those who smile to your face, but stab you in the back. Mom, what are you talking about? Laurie asked, confused. About your beloved grandfather who manipulated everyone around him his entire life, Veronica exclaimed. Who turned you against me and Roland for years, who used you as a pawn in his game. Veronica, Malcolm warned, but she just waved him off. Don't worry, Malcolm, we're leaving. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Roland silently followed her but stopped next to Laurie. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, he said quietly. Cardwell Construction has secrets you don't even know about. Garrett did you a disservice. Before Laurie could respond, Roland followed Veronica out. The door slammed behind them. Laurie turned to the others. What was that? Shock and anger, replied Frank Larson, the company's lawyer. They were sure that Garrett would leave the management of the company to Roland. In recent months, Roland had even begun to act as if he were already the CEO. Mr. Hasing crossed a lot of people, added Deborah Fletcher. He fired several key managers who had worked with Garrett for years and promoted his own people. All this with the tacit consent of your grandfather, who by then was too ill to actively resist. But now the situation has changed, Malcolm summed up, and judging by their reaction, they're not going to give up without a fight. What's going on with the company? Lori asked bluntly. Mom mentioned some problems. Roland talked about secrets. What do I need to know? Malcolm exchanged glances with Deborah and Frank. 8 years ago, Cardwell Construction did indeed face financial difficulties, he began. The Ashfield Gardens project was in danger of being scrapped due to the economic crisis. Roland, who was working for an investment company at the time, proposed a restructuring plan that helped stabilize the situation. So he really saved the company? Lori asked. Partly, Malcolm nodded, but your grandfather paid a high price for it. Roland insisted on bringing in investors who took a stake in the company. Later, Garrett bought them back, but at the cost of huge loans. In addition, Roland was appointed financial director and given full access to all the company's accounts. And then he married my mother. Exactly, Malcolm confirmed. Garrett believed that Roland had planned to take control of the company from the beginning and used your mother as a tool to achieve his goal. That sounds a bit dramatic, Lori remarked. I've known Roland for 8 years. Yes, he's ambitious and perhaps not the most pleasant person, but to call him a movie villain. Your grandfather wasn't paranoid, Malcolm said gently. Over the past year, he gathered a lot of evidence that Roland was not acting in the company's best interests. That's why he changed his will and insisted that you work in the finance department. He wanted you to see for yourself what was going on. Lori remembered the strange meetings where Roland insisted on writing off assets, selling profitable divisions, and cutting staff, even when there was no obvious need to do so. She remembered how her grandfather had always asked her to attend these meetings and listen carefully. What should I do now? She asked, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on her shoulders. Accept your inheritance, Malcolm replied simply. Become the leader your grandfather believed you could be. We'll help you. He nodded to Deborah and Frank. There are still people in the company who are loyal to Garrett and his vision. In the meantime, Mrs. Wilcox added, unexpectedly joining the conversation, you need to decide where you're going to live for the next month, Miss Lorraine. I'm not going to kick my mother out of her home before her time, Lori said firmly. If she doesn't want to see me there right now, I'll find another place. You can stay with me, came a voice from the door. Tessa was standing there with a travel bag in her hand. I packed your things as you asked. Just the essentials. Lori looked at her friend in surprise. How did you know? Malcolm called me after your conversation yesterday, Tessa explained. He said you might need some support, and after the will was read, I received a message from Mrs. Wilcox. Lori glanced at the housekeeper, who smiled slightly. Mr. Garrett asked me to take care of you, Miss Lorraine. I'm just doing what he asked. Thank you, Lori said sincerely. Thank you all. I don't know if I can handle all this, but I'll try not to let Grandpa down. You're not alone, Malcolm assured her. And your grandfather left you not only his company and his home, but also, let's say, additional resources that will help you protect his legacy. What do you mean? All in good time, the lawyer replied. Right now, focus on settling into your new role. We'll talk about the details later. Lori nodded, sensing that Malcolm was hiding something important, but decided not to press him right now. Too much had happened in the last few days, and she needed time to process it all. Let's go to my place, Tessa suggested, touching her shoulder. I have a spare bedroom, a couch that remembers all our movie marathons from school, and a bottle of good whiskey to help you digest all this news. Lori smiled gratefully at her friend. Despite the dark clouds hanging overhead, she felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. Her grandfather had believed in her, and perhaps he had left her not only a material inheritance, but something far more valuable, people she could trust. Lori's first day as CEO of Cardwell Construction began with a board meeting. The conference room on the top floor of the company's headquarters was filled with people, many of whom looked openly dissatisfied with what was happening. Lori felt skeptical, appraising glances on her. She had put on her best business suit, dark blue, conservative with minimal jewelry. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun. She wanted to look professional and confident, even though she was trembling with tension inside. "Good morning," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you all for coming. I understand that the news of the change in leadership has come as a surprise to many of you." "That's an understatement," muttered Victor Price, the head of sales, one of the people Roland had brought into the company 3 years ago. Lori pretended not to hear him. "My grandfather, Garrett Cardwell, dedicated his entire life to this company. He built it from the ground up and turned it into a leader in the regional construction industry. I grew up listening to his stories about every project, every building that Cardwell Construction built. For the past 4 years, I've worked in various departments, learning about the company from the inside. I have no illusions about the scale of responsibility that now rests on my shoulders. But I intend to do everything in my power to ensure that our company continues to thrive." She glanced around the table, trying to make eye contact with everyone present. Some, like Deborah Fletcher, the executive director, looked approvingly. Others, like Price, were openly skeptical. "I have no ambition to turn everything upside down," Lori continued, "at least not until I understand the current situation, so I'm asking each department head to prepare a report for me on their current projects, issues, and plans for the next quarter. I want to get a complete picture first." "What about the Riverbank project?" asked Allison Jenkins, the company's chief architect. "Mr. Hazing insisted on speeding up construction despite the groundwater issues we discovered." Lori frowned. It was a large riverfront residential development that had come through her department when she worked in the design office. She remembered the discussions about the potential risks. "Safety comes first," she said firmly. "If there are problems with the soil, we need to resolve them before moving forward. Allison, prepare a detailed report on the situation for me. I want to visit the site myself tomorrow." Jenkins nodded with visible relief. Lori noticed several board members exchange glances. She had just overturned Roland's decision, and it was a clear signal of a change in direction. "Are there any other issues that require immediate attention?" Lori asked. "The staffing schedule," said Bruce Logan, the head of human resources, a stocky man of retirement age who had been with the company almost as long as Lori's grandfather. "Mr. Hazing has initiated a workforce optimization program. 15 employees are to be laid off by the end of the week." "On what grounds?" Lori asked, surprised. She hadn't heard anything about this. "Cost-cutting," Logan replied. "Although, to be honest, most of these people have been with the company for over 10 years and were loyal to your grandfather." Lori didn't need to be told what that meant. Roland was getting rid of the old guard and replacing them with his own people. "Put all the layoffs on hold," she ordered. "I want to review every case personally before making a decision." A barely perceptible smile flitted across Logan's face. "As you wish, Miss Cardwell." The meeting continued for another hour. Lori tried to remember every detail, to figure out who was on her side and who wasn't. By the end of the meeting, she had made a mental list of priorities and assigned responsibilities. Despite the obvious resistance of some managers, the first step had been taken. "Thank you, everyone," she said, concluding the meeting. "I expect your reports by tomorrow morning. If you have any urgent questions, please contact me directly." As everyone began to leave, Lori noticed Victor Price and 2 other managers brought in by Roland lingering at the door, whispering about something and shooting her dirty looks. She pretended not to notice, but made a mental note to be especially careful around them. "Not bad for your first day," said Deborah Fletcher, approaching her when everyone else had left. "You held your own." "Thanks," replied Lori, "although I felt like I was skydiving without an instructor." Deborah smiled. "Get used to it. That feeling won't go away completely even after a year. Running a company is a constant leap into the unknown." "Good to know," Lori said with a wry smile. "Deborah, I need your help. I want to understand what's been going on in the company over the last few months while my grandfather was ill. Something tells me that Roland wasn't just using this time to prepare for a smooth transition of power." "Your intuition is right," Deborah nodded. "But maybe we shouldn't discuss this here. The walls have ears." "My office?" "It's safer at mine," Deborah shook her head. "The memory of Roland is still fresh in yours. Who knows what surprises he might have left there." Deborah Fletcher's office was 1 floor below, in the east wing of the building. away from the central area where the executive offices were located. Lori had never been here before. As a regular employee, she had no direct dealings with the executive director. "Have a seat," Deborah said, closing the door and checking that the blinds were closed. "What I'm about to tell you must remain within these four walls, at least for now." Lori nodded, feeling a sense of unease growing inside her. "For the past 3 months, while Garrett has been bedridden, Roland has effectively taken over the company," Deborah began. "He's been overturning your grandfather's decisions, selling off assets, firing people loyal to Garrett, and pushing through some, let's say, questionable projects." "Like what?" "Riverbank, which Allison mentioned. I'll never believe that Garrett would have approved building on that site, knowing about the groundwater problems. But Roland insisted because the land was expensive, and he didn't want to lose his investment, even at the expense of the safety of future residents." Lori frowned. Her grandfather had always told her that a builder's reputation was more important than any profit. "We build homes where people will live for decades," he would repeat. "If we treat it lightly, it will come back to haunt us and those who have entrusted their lives to us." "What else?" she asked. "Contracts with new suppliers, even though the old ones were reliable and proven over the years, layoffs of experienced employees under the guise of optimization, and the strangest thing, large financial transactions that didn't go through the standard approval procedures." "What kind of transactions?" "I don't know exactly." Deborah shook her head. "The finance department was completely controlled by Roland, but according to the cash flow reports I've seen, there have been several large payments made in recent months to companies I've never heard of before. When I tried to find out the details, I was told that these were strategic investments." Lori remembered how, when she worked in the finance department, Roland always handled certain payments himself, not allowing any of the employees to touch them. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now. "Do you have access to the financial reports?" "Limited," Deborah replied. "As executive director, I see the big picture, but not the details. Only Garrett and Roland had full access." "And now I do," Lori remarked. "I think I should take a close look at all the transactions for the last year." "Be careful," Deborah warned. "Roland isn't the type to give up easily, and he still has allies in the company." "I noticed," Lori nodded. "The question is how many and how influential they are. Enough to cause you problems, especially if you start digging too deep." Lori thought about it. The situation was more complicated than she had thought. Roland wasn't just claiming control of the company, he already controlled many aspects of it, and it seemed that something was amiss in the financial affairs. "Thanks for your honesty, Deborah. I appreciate your help." "Your grandfather was a good man," Deborah replied simply, "and I believe you can preserve his legacy. But you'll need support." "Who else can I trust in the company?" Deborah thought for a moment. "Bruce Logan from HR is old school and was loyal to your grandfather. Allison Jenkins is also reliable, although she had to make compromises with Roland to keep her job. Frank Larson, the company lawyer, has always remained neutral, but he is honest and follows the letter of the law." She paused. "But I wouldn't trust Victor Price and his team. They're completely on Roland's side." "That's what I thought," Lori nodded. "Well, we'll have to proceed with caution." She spent the rest of the day familiarizing herself with the company's current projects, meeting with department heads, and trying to get a complete picture of what was going on. By evening, her head was spinning with information, but Lori felt she was beginning to understand the scale of the problems she would face. When the office emptied, she finally decided to go into her grandfather's office, now her own. It was a spacious room with huge windows overlooking the city. The walls were covered with photographs of buildings constructed by Cardwell Construction over the years. On the massive dark wood desk stood an old computer, folders with papers, an organizer, and a framed photograph of her grandfather, her father, and herself as a little girl with pigtails, standing in front of the newly completed municipal library. Lori walked over to the desk and ran her hand over the smooth surface. Here, in this office, her grandfather had made important decisions, made plans, and dreamed about the future of the company. And now it was all on her shoulders. She sat down in the chair and turned on the computer. Fortunately, Malcolm had given her all the passwords her grandfather had left in case of his death. The system booted up, and Lori began browsing through the files, trying to find anything that might shed light on the financial transactions Deborah had mentioned. After an hour of searching, her eyes began to droop. Most of the documents were about current projects, contracts, and routine operational matters. Nothing suspicious. But something told Lori that her grandfather would not have kept compromising material about Roland in plain sight. She leaned back in her chair and massaged her temples. Maybe she was looking in the wrong place? Her gaze fell on a framed photograph. Lori picked it up, tenderly examining the faces of her loved ones. Suddenly, she noticed that the frame was too heavy for its size. Turning it over in her hands, she discovered that the back panel did not come off completely, as is usually the case with photo frames, but had a hidden cavity. Her heart began to beat faster. Lori carefully removed a folded piece of paper from the hiding place. It was a note written in her grandfather's sweeping handwriting. "Lori, if you are reading this, it means I was unable to finish what I started. I am sorry for the burden I have placed on your shoulders. I suspect that Roland is using the company for personal gain. Over the past year, I've discovered several strange transactions that don't make sense from a business standpoint. Check the files in the Project Archive 2015 folder on my home computer, paying particular attention to the Blue Harbor project. The password is your father's date of birth. Be careful, Lori. Roland is a dangerous man, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. G.K." Lori reread the note several times, feeling a chill run down her spine. Her grandfather didn't just suspect that something was wrong with Roland, he had been gathering evidence. And now it was up to her to continue his investigation. The next morning, Lori received a message from Malcolm Pierce. The lawyer asked to meet urgently. She made an appointment for the afternoon, planning to visit the riverbank construction site in the morning, as she had promised Allison Jenkins. The site was a huge plot of land on the riverbank, partially cleared, with the foundations laid for a future residential complex. Allison met her at the entrance, wearing a hard hat and a safety vest. "Thank you for coming, Miss Cardwell," said the architect, handing her a similar set of protective clothing. "I wanted you to see the problem for yourself." They walked across the site to where the builders were digging. Even to the untrained eye, it was clear that the ground was too wet. "We drilled several wells to assess the groundwater level," Allison explained, pointing to a map of the area. "As you can see, the water is almost at the surface here. At this level, there is a risk of flooding the foundation, especially during the rainy season." "And Roland knew about this?" Lori asked. "Yes, he did," Allison nodded. "We gave him a full report, but he insisted on continuing with the work, saying that we could reinforce the foundation and install additional drainage systems." "Is that possible?" "Theoretically, yes, but it would significantly increase the cost of the project and still not provide a 100% guarantee. I would recommend revising the entire project, possibly changing the layout or even considering a different site." Lori thought about it. It was a large project in which significant funds had already been invested. Cancellation or major restructuring would be a blow to the company's finances, but the risk of building on a problematic site was even higher. "Prepare a full report on the possible options," she finally decided, "with a detailed analysis of the costs and risks for each one. In the meantime, suspend all work on this site." "Mr. Hazing won't like that," Allison remarked. "Mr. Hazing no longer makes decisions at this company," Lori replied firmly. By the time she returned to the office, news of the Riverbank project's suspension had already spread throughout the company. Victor Price caught her in the hallway, unable to hide his irritation. "Miss Cardwell, do you have any idea how much money we're losing by stopping construction?" he snapped at her. "We've already sold 30% of the apartments in this complex under preliminary contracts. And do you have any idea how much money and reputation we'll lose when the buildings start to sink or crack because of foundation problems?" Lori parried. "Not to mention the potential lawsuits if, God forbid, there's an accident. Roland approved this project." "Now I approve it," Lori cut him off. "And I say we're not going to risk people's lives for a quick profit. That's the principle my grandfather built this company on, and I intend to stick to it." Price wanted to say something, But at that moment the secretary came in to say that Malcolm Pierce was waiting in the conference room. Lori nodded to Price, indicating that the conversation was over and headed for the meeting. Malcolm looked concerned. He placed a folder of documents in front of Lori. "Roland and Veronica have filed a lawsuit," he said without preamble. "They are contesting Garrett's will on the grounds that he was mentally incompetent when he signed it." Lori opened the folder and scanned the documents. "Do they have any evidence?" "They claim that in the last months of his life, Garrett was taking strong painkillers that could have affected his mental capacity. In addition, they have provided a medical opinion, not from the doctor who treated Garrett, but from some expert who never met your grandfather personally, stating that patients with such a diagnosis often suffer from mental confusion." "That's ridiculous," Lori exclaimed. "Grandpa was of sound mind until the day he died. We talked about company business just a week before he died." "I know," Malcolm nodded, "and I'm sure we can challenge their claim. But it will be a long and messy process. They will try to discredit Garrett's memory, portray him as a frail old man who didn't know what he was doing." Lori felt anger boiling up inside her. How could Veronica do this to her own father's memory? Was control of the company really more important to her than anything else? "What should we do?" she asked. "Fight," Malcolm replied simply. "We have statements from the doctors who actually treated Garrett. There are witnesses who can confirm his sanity at the time the will was signed. And, most importantly, there is evidence that your grandfather gathered against Roland. If we present it to the court, it could completely change the course of the case." "Evidence?" Lori asked, remembering the note she had found in the photo frame. "Do you know about it?" "Not all of it, but some of it." Malcolm nodded. "Garrett shared his suspicions about Roland with me. He believed that Roland was using the company to launder money through fictitious contracts and offshore accounts." "I found the note," Lori said, taking a folded piece of paper out of her bag. "Grandpa mentioned some Blue Harbor project and files on his home computer." Malcolm read the note carefully. "Blue Harbor," he said thoughtfully. "That was a resort development project on the coast that Garrett abandoned about 5 years ago because of environmental issues." "I don't understand what that has to do with Roland." "I need to get to Grandpa's computer," Lori said. "It should be in his study at the house." "The house where Veronica and Roland are living now," Malcolm reminded her. "And I doubt they'll be happy to see you, especially after the lawsuit." Lori thought about it. The house belonged to her by will, but Veronica and Roland had the right to stay there for at least another 3 weeks. She couldn't just show up and demand access to her grandfather's study. "Maybe Mrs. Wilcox could help?" she suggested. "She still works in the house, right?" "Yes, as far as I know," Malcolm nodded. "But it's risky. If Roland suspects she's helping you, he might fire her." "I have to get those files," Lori said firmly. "They could be the key to exposing Roland and protecting my grandfather's legacy." Malcolm looked at her doubtfully. "All right," he finally agreed. "I'll contact Mrs. Wilcox and see if she can help. But be prepared for Roland not to give up easily. If he's really guilty of financial fraud, he'll fight to the end to hide the truth." Lori nodded, feeling her resolve strengthen. She would not let Roland destroy what her grandfather had built. She would not let him tarnish the memory of Garrett Cardwell. And if that meant going to war with her stepfather and her own mother, so be it. "I'll find those files," she said, "and I'll find out what Roland is hiding, whatever it takes." A downpour hit Ashfield as evening fell. Lori watched the rain streaming down the window of Tessa's apartment and nervously checked her phone every 5 minutes. Mrs. Wilcox was supposed to contact her as soon as she had a chance to get to her grandfather's computer. It had been 3 days since Malcolm had spoken to the housekeeper, but the right moment hadn't presented itself yet. Roland hardly left the house, as if he suspected something. "Maybe you should just go in and demand access to the computer?" suggested Tessa, watching her friend pace nervously around the room. "After all, it's your house now." "And start an open war?" Lori shook her head. "No, Roland is smart enough to destroy or hide the files if he realizes I'm looking for something. We need to be more cunning." The phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Tonight at 8. They're leaving for a charity dinner at a country club. I'll be home alone." "It's her," Lori breathed. "I can get into the house tonight." "I'm coming with you," Tessa said firmly. just in case. When they pulled up to the Cardwell family mansion, it was already dark. Rain continued to drum on the roof of the car, and Lori shivered, not so much from the cold as from a strange feeling. She was returning to the house of her childhood as an uninvited guest, sneaking in like a thief. "Are you sure they're not there?" Tessa asked, looking at the lights burning in several windows. "Mrs. Wilcox wrote that they left at 7:30, Lori replied. "She must have left the lights on purpose." They got out of the car and quickly made their way to the side entrance, usually used by the staff. The door opened as soon as Lori knocked, and Mrs. Wilcox appeared on the threshold. "Miss Lorraine, Miss Tessa," the housekeeper said, letting them in. "Hurry, you'll get wet." "We don't have more than 2 hours," she said. "The charity dinner usually ends at 11, and they'll be back soon. Mr. Rowland has been very nervous lately, locking himself in his study and talking on the phone in whispers." "Have you been in Grandpa's study?" Lori asked. "Is the computer there?" "Yes, everything is as usual," nodded the housekeeper. "But I'm not sure it works. Mr. Rowland forbade me to clean Mr. Garrett's study, saying he would do it himself." Lori and Tessa exchanged glances. It seemed suspicious. They climbed the back stairs to the second floor. Grandfather's study was in the east wing, overlooking the garden. It had once been the brightest room in the mansion, but now, in the darkness and rain, it seemed gloomy and unwelcoming. Mrs. Wilcox opened the door with her key, and Lori was surprised to find that nothing in the room had changed. All of her grandfather's things were in their places: books on the shelves, models of buildings the company had built, an old globe in the corner, a worn leather armchair by the fireplace. Even the smell was the same, a mixture of tobacco, old books, and the aftershave his grandfather used. "I'll keep watch downstairs," said Mrs. Wilcox. "If I see anything, I'll come right up and let you know." As soon as the housekeeper's door closed, Lori quickly went to the desk where her grandfather's computer stood, an old-fashioned desktop PC with a large monitor. Fortunately, it was just turned off, not dismantled as Lori had feared. "I hope Rowland didn't get to the files," she muttered as she turned on the computer. The system booted up, prompting for a password. Lori entered her father's date of birth as indicated in the note, April 22nd, 1976. The computer accepted the password, and the desktop appeared on the screen with a multitude of folders. "He wrote about the 2015 Project Archive folder," Lori said, looking through the files. "Here it is." The folder contained subfolders with the names of various Cardwell construction projects for that year. The name Blue Harbor really stood out. This project was supposed to be an oceanfront resort complex, but it was canceled due to environmental concerns. "It's strange that Grandpa kept it in the active projects archive," Lori remarked as she opened the folder. Inside, she found not the project documentation she had expected, but dozens of files containing financial reports, screenshots of bank transactions, and scanned copies of contracts. After quickly skimming through the documents, Lori felt a chill run down her spine. "What's this?" Tessa asked, looking over her friend's shoulder. "Evidence," Lori replied quietly. Grandpa had compiled a dossier on Rowland. The documents showed that over the past 3 years, Rowland had created a network of shell companies through which he had siphoned funds from Cardwell Construction. One of these companies was Blue Harbor Development, registered in the Cayman Islands. This firm allegedly provided consulting services for construction projects, receiving large sums of money for this, but in fact did not perform any work. "Look here," Lori pointed to a document with bank details. "The ultimate beneficiary of Blue Harbor is some kind of trust, but Rowland is listed as one of its managers. He literally wrote checks to himself on behalf of the company." "Oh my God," Tessa gasped. "How much did he steal?" "Judging by these reports, more than $6 million over 3 years, Lori continued to look through the files. "And that's just through one shell company. Here are documents about 2 more similar structures." In another folder, she found her grandfather's personal notes, a kind of investigation diary. Garrett wrote that he first suspected something was wrong about a year ago when he noticed strange discrepancies in the financial reports. He began secretly monitoring Rowland's actions, copying documents and recording conversations. "Rowland is skillfully manipulating Veronica," Garrett wrote in one of his notes. He has convinced her that I am becoming too old and unrestrained to run the company. He is using her resentment and disappointment to turn her against me. It's a pity that our relationship with our daughter was never close enough for her to see his true colors." Lori felt a pang of regret. Her grandfather had suffered not only from Roland's betrayal, but also from his estrangement from his own daughter. "There are some audio recordings here," Tessa remarked, pointing to a folder of files. Lori opened the first file, and Roland's voice came from the computer speakers. "We need to speed up the process. The old man is clinging to power for too long. If we wait another year, it may be too late. He's starting to suspect something." The second voice belonged to Victor Price, the head of sales. "Oh, what do you suggest? We can't just fire him. It's his company." "Not for long," Roland replied. "I'm working on it. Veronica is completely on my side. She'll help convince the board that Garrett is no longer capable of running the business. In the meantime, we need to make sure our operations remain undetected." Lori turned off the recording, feeling anger boiling inside her. Roland wasn't just stealing money. He was planning to remove her grandfather from the company using her mother as a tool. "When was this recording made?" Tessa asked. Lori checked the file date. "A little over a year ago, around the same time Grandpa changed his will." "Now I understand why he left the company to you and not Veronica," Tessa remarked. He knew Roland was controlling her. They continued to study the files, finding more and more evidence of Roland's financial machinations. Grandpa had been methodical and thorough. He had compiled a veritable dossier that left no doubt about Lori's stepfather's guilt. "We have to copy all of this," Tessa said, taking a flash drive out of her bag, "and as soon as possible." Lori nodded and began moving the files. At that moment, the office door flew open, and Mrs. Wilcox appeared in the doorway, looking frightened. "They're back," she whispered. "The charity dinner has been canceled because of the storm." They just drove into the yard. "Damn," Lori cursed, looking at the copy indicator. The process was only half done. "We need a few more minutes." "You don't have a few minutes?" The housekeeper shook her head. "They're already coming into the house. Mr. Roland could be up here any minute." Lori's mind raced. Leaving the computer on would give away their presence, but if she turned it off without finishing the copy, they would lose the evidence. "Tessa, finish the copy," she said firmly. "I'll go downstairs and distract them. This is my house. I have a right to be here." She quickly descended the main staircase and entered the hall just as Veronica and Roland were taking off their rain-soaked coats. "Good evening," Lori said calmly. Both turned abruptly. Veronica looked stunned, and Roland's face was contorted with anger. "What are you doing here?" he blurted out. "How did you get in?" "This is my house," Lori replied, trying to sound confident. "According to my grandfather's will, and I have the keys." "The will is being contested," Roland reminded her. "Until the court decides, you have no right." "I do," Lori interrupted. "The will is valid until the court declares it invalid, and that's unlikely to happen, given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Veronica asked, looking at her daughter suspiciously. "The circumstances that led Grandpa to change his will," Lori replied, watching Roland's reaction closely. "Circumstances related to the company's financial transactions." Roland paled but quickly regained his composure. "What are you talking about?" His voice sounded strained. "If you have any questions about the company's finances, they should be discussed at the office, not by barging into our home in the middle of the night." Lori noticed Roland glance nervously toward the stairs leading to Garrett's office. She didn't have much time to distract him. "Lorraine," Veronica said, her voice a mixture of fatigue and irritation, "if you've come to prove yourself right again, you've chosen the wrong time." "I came to pick up some of my things," Lori lied, "and to see how you're treating the house that will soon be entirely mine." At that moment, Tessa appeared on the stairs, holding a cardboard box. "I packed everything, Lori," she said. "Hello, Mrs. Hazing, Mr. Hazing. Sorry to intrude, we're leaving now." Roland looked from Tessa to Lori and back, clearly suspicious. "What else did you take?" he asked sharply. "What's in the box?" "My things," Lori replied firmly. "Books, photo albums, a few souvenirs." Nothing that belongs to you. She walked over to Tessa and took the box, feeling something heavy inside. The flash drive must be in there. We're leaving, Lori said. Thanks for your hospitality. The next morning, Lori called an emergency board meeting. She spent the entire night reviewing documents with Deborah Fletcher and Frank Larson, the company's lawyer. Both were shocked by the scale of Roland's machinations. By noon, the conference room was full. The board members were talking among themselves, wondering about the reason for the urgent meeting. Roland sat at the far end of the table, outwardly calm, but Lori noticed him tapping his fingers nervously on the armrest of his chair. "Thank you all for coming," Lori began. "I called this meeting to discuss a matter of extreme importance concerning the financial security of our company." She nodded to Deborah, who turned on the projector. The first slide of the presentation appeared on the screen, showing Cardwell Construction's financial flows for the past 3 years. "As you can see," Lori continued, "since 2021, our financial statements have included large payments for consulting services to several companies. The total amount of these payments exceeds $15 million. "What's unusual about these payments?" asked Peter Morgan, one of the oldest members of the board. "We regularly use the services of consultants." "What is unusual," replied Lori, moving on to the next slide, "is that these companies do not actually exist. They were created solely to withdraw funds from Cardwell Construction." Documents appeared on the screen showing the registration of companies in the Cayman Islands, Belize, and Panama. Next to them were bank statements showing transfers of money to these companies and then to personal accounts. "And these," Lori pointed to the names of the beneficiaries, "are the ultimate recipients of these funds. As you can see, they are all connected in one way or another to one man, Roland Heising." A deathly silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to Roland, who turned pale but continued to maintain his outward composure. "This is absurd," he finally said. "These documents are obviously forged. Someone is trying to smear my name." "The documents are genuine," Lori objected. "They were collected by my grandfather, Garrett Cardwell, during the last year of his life. He suspected something was wrong when he discovered discrepancies in the financial reports." "And where did he keep this so-called evidence?" Roland asked sarcastically. "Under his pillow?" "On his computer in encrypted files," Lori replied. "The computer you tried to access after his death, didn't you?" Roland clenched his fists but said nothing. "We don't just have documents," Lori continued. "We have audio recordings made by Garrett. Recordings in which you discuss your plans to take control of the company and cover up financial fraud." She nodded to Deborah, who played one of the recordings. Roland's voice, discussing plans with Victor Price to remove Garrett from the company's management, echoed throughout the conference room. The faces of the board members reflected their shocking realization. "This is a fake," Roland blurted out, jumping to his feet. "Someone faked my voice. This is a conspiracy against me." "The recordings are authentic," Lori said calmly. "They can be verified by experts, just like all the other evidence." She glanced around at those present. "Members of the board, the facts speak for themselves. Roland Heising systematically embezzled funds from our company, deceived his colleagues, and planned to take control of the business my grandfather built with his life." "This is ridiculous!" Roland exclaimed. "Are you really going to believe this girl?" "All this so-called evidence could have been fabricated by her to eliminate me as a rival." "Mr. Heising," Frank Larson spoke up, "I personally checked these documents. They are authentic, and we have already contacted the banks through which the transactions were made. They have confirmed their existence. This is not a forgery." Roland looked around at those present, seeing that there was no support to be found. Even Victor Price, his closest ally, looked away. "You'll all regret this," he said through clenched teeth. "Especially you." He stared at Lori. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." With that, he turned abruptly and left the room, slamming the door so hard that the glass rattled. "Well," said Peter Morgan after a long pause, "I suppose we should vote on Mr. Heising's dismissal and initiate legal action. All in favor?" All hands went up, unanimously. Bright sunlight flooded Lori's office. A week had passed since Roland's exposure, and for the first time in a long time, she could breathe freely. The morning meetings were over, and she was now reviewing reports from the finance department, which Deborah Fletcher was temporarily heading. An internal audit had revealed that Roland had embezzled nearly $20 million from the company over 3 years, a significant but not catastrophic amount for a business the size of Cardwell Construction. The phone on her desk rang. It was Malcolm Pierce. "Good morning, Lori." The lawyer's voice sounded calm. "I have good news. Roland has agreed to a deal." "What deal?" Lori frowned. After that meeting, Roland had disappeared, and none of the company's employees had seen him. Even Veronica wasn't answering her daughter's calls. "A refund in exchange for withdrawing the criminal complaint," Malcolm explained. "He agreed to return all the money he took from the company, plus interest, and to waive his claim to your inheritance. In exchange, we will not press criminal charges and will allow him to leave the country." "He's leaving?" "He's leaving?" Lori asked in surprise. "He's already left," the lawyer said with satisfaction. "He signed all the papers this morning and went straight to the airport. As far as I understand, he's returning to Europe, where he has some family ties." "What about Mom?" Lori asked, feeling a sudden pang of anxiety. "He's leaving her?" Malcolm paused. "Your mother knows about the agreement," he finally said. "But it's best to discuss the details with her personally. She asked me to tell you that she'll be waiting for you at home tonight." After her conversation with Malcolm, Lori couldn't concentrate on her work. Her thoughts kept returning to her mother. How had Veronica taken the truth about her husband's machinations? Did she believe he was guilty, or did she still think it was a conspiracy against Roland? And what did her invitation to come home mean? That evening, Lori parked her car at the Cardwell family mansion, which now officially belonged to her. She had been staying with Tessa for the past 2 weeks, not wanting to create any additional tension until the situation with Roland was resolved. But now that he was gone, it was time to return. Mrs. Wilcox opened the door. The housekeeper looked tired, but a slight smile appeared on her face when she saw Lori. "Miss Lorraine," she stepped aside to let the girl pass, "your mother is waiting for you in the conservatory." The conservatory was at the back of the house, a spacious, glass-enclosed veranda filled with plants and wicker furniture. It had always been Veronica's favorite place to read and think. Lori's mother sat in an armchair by the window, looking out at the garden, which was beginning to wake up after winter. Hearing footsteps, she turned around. Lori was struck by how much Veronica had changed over the past week. Always impeccably dressed and coiffed, she now looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her makeup-free face looked pale and gaunt. "Lorraine," Veronica stood up, tentatively reaching out to her daughter, but stopped halfway. "Thank you for coming." "Malcolm said you wanted to see me." Lori approached, still unsure of what to expect. "I heard about the deal with Roland." Veronica nodded, sinking back into the chair. "Sit down, please. We need to talk." Lori sat down opposite her, studying her mother's face. For the first time in many years, she saw Veronica looking so vulnerable, stripped of her usual protective armor of self-confidence and social graces. "Did you know?" asked Lori bluntly. "Did you know what Roland was doing?" Veronica shook her head slowly. "No, at least not the extent of his activities." She took a deep breath. "I knew he was involved in some financial transactions he called optimization. He said it was what all companies did, that it was standard practice. I didn't get into the details." "But you supported him," Lori remarked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "You helped him turn the board against your grandfather." "Yes," Veronica lowered her gaze. "Roland convinced me that your grandfather was becoming unstable, that his decisions were threatening the future of the company, and I believed him." She looked up, and Lori saw pain and shame in her eyes. "I was blind, Lorraine. He was persuasive. He knew how to play on my weaknesses, on my long-standing resentment toward my father, and I let him use me." "Why were you always so opposed to Grandpa?" Lori asked the question that had tormented her for years. "He loved you. He was proud of you." Veronica smiled bitterly. "Loved me? Maybe. But did he understand? Never." She ran her hand through her hair. "Your grandfather was a man of one passion, his company. He expected everyone around him to share that passion with the same intensity. Your father lived up to those expectations. I didn't. But he never pressured you to work for the company, Lori objected. Not directly, Veronica nodded. But he always made it clear that my life, my interests, were secondary to the great Cardwell cause. When your father died, her voice faltered. Dad threw himself into his work almost immediately. It was his way of coping with his grief. And I was left alone with my pain, with a 14-year-old child to raise. And instead of support, I got disapproval. Disapproval? He thought I should be stronger, Veronica explained, that I should pull myself together and get busy. And when I couldn't live up to those expectations, he just took you away. Not physically, of course, but emotionally, intellectually, you became his student, his heir. He just cut me out of the equation. Lori had never looked at the situation from that perspective. In her memories, her grandfather was a hero who had saved her from loneliness after her father's death. She had never considered how her mother might have felt. I'm sorry, Lori said quietly. I didn't know you felt that way. I don't blame you, Veronica shook her head. You were a child, and you lost your father too. It's natural that you would gravitate toward your grandfather, toward his strength and confidence. She paused. But a gap formed between us, and over the years it only widened. And then Roland came along, Lori added. Yes, Veronica nodded. A handsome, confident man who seemed genuinely interested in me, not just my company, who listened to me, understood my hurts and disappointments. At least that's what I thought. He manipulated you, Lori said gently. Your grandfather saw it. His notes mention many times how Roland used your feelings against him. I know. Veronica wiped away an unbidden tear. Malcolm showed me some documents and recordings of conversations. God, how could I have been so blind? You loved him, Lori replied simply. Love often blinds us. Veronica looked at her daughter with surprise, as if seeing for the first time a mature, understanding woman instead of the stubborn teenager she had always thought Lori was. When did you become so wise? She asked with a slight smile. I had a good teacher, Lori shrugged. Grandpa always said that understanding people is more important than understanding numbers. People build businesses, not papers. They were silent for a while, each lost in her own thoughts. Then Veronica spoke again. Lorraine, I'm so ashamed of how I behaved, for supporting Roland against you and Dad, for not seeing the truth, even when it was right in front of my eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I hope, in time. Mom. Lori reached out and covered Veronica's hand with hers. You're my mother. No matter what happens, that won't change. Yes, we have a lot to talk about, a lot to fix in our relationship, but we're a family, and families don't turn their backs on each other in difficult times. Veronica squeezed her daughter's hand, and her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea how much that means to me. What are you going to do now? Lori asked. Leave Roland? No, Veronica replied firmly. That's definitely not an option. Our marriage is over. He asked me to go with him, but even before I found out about his schemes, I was starting to realize that something wasn't right between us. And now? She shook her head. I filed for divorce 2 days ago. Where are you going to go? Lori looked around the winter garden. You like this house? I'll find an apartment in town, Veronica shrugged. According to the will, I have 3 days to vacate the house. Mrs. Wilcox is already helping me pack. Lori thought for a moment. Over the past few weeks, she had been so focused on the company and her fight with Roland that she had hardly thought about what she would do with the huge family mansion where she had grown up. The idea of living there alone seemed strange. What if you don't have to leave? She suggested. The house is huge. There's enough room for both of us. And it's your home, too. You've lived here all your life. Veronica looked at her daughter with hope and uncertainty. Is that what you want, after everything that's happened? I think we both need time to heal, Lori replied honestly. And maybe it's better to do it together than apart. Of course, we'll have to set some boundaries and respect each other's personal space. But yes, I'd like that. Me too, Veronica admitted quietly. Very much. The days that followed were filled not only with work managing the company, but also with the process of rebuilding her relationship with her mother. They established new rules for living together and found ways to spend time together without invading each other's personal space. Veronica even began to take an interest in the business, not with the aim of interfering, but to better understand her daughter's world. Changes also took place in the company. Lori reorganized the finance department, bringing in a new director from outside the company, an experienced professional with an impeccable reputation. She began reviewing the projects Roland had launched, many of which turned out to be problematic or ineffective. The riverbank project was completely redesigned to address groundwater issues, which increased its cost but ensured the safety of future residents. The board of directors fully supported her initiatives. After Roland's exposure, Lori's authority was greatly strengthened. Even those who had initially doubted her abilities now recognized that she had proven herself to be a decisive and principled leader. One evening, about a month after Roland's exposure, Lori decided to tidy up her grandfather's office, which had now become her home office. As she sorted through the books on the shelves, she accidentally knocked over an old mahogany box on the top shelf. The box fell and papers spilled out. As she gathered them up, Lori noticed that one of the envelopes was addressed to her. It was sealed and inscribed in her grandfather's distinctive handwriting, "To Lorraine, to be opened after my death." With a pounding heart, she carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated the same day her grandfather had changed his will. "Dear Lori, if you are reading this letter, it means that I am no longer alive and you have come into your inheritance. I hope the transition of power has gone smoothly, although knowing Roland, I doubt it. He is ambitious and unprincipled, qualities that can be useful in business if balanced by honesty and integrity. Unfortunately, in Roland's case, the balance is off. By the time you read this letter, you will probably have already discovered the evidence of his machinations that I have been gathering over the past year. I began to suspect something was amiss when I noticed strange discrepancies in the financial statements. Roland is too confident in his cunning and underestimates an old man who built a business from scratch and has seen every trick in the book. But this letter is not about him. It is about you, my dear granddaughter, and the future of Cardwell Construction. The construction business has always been difficult. It requires nerves of steel, a clear mind, and the ability to see years ahead. When I started out, personal connections and handshakes were everything. Today, the world has changed. Technology, globalization, and environmental requirements are changing the rules of the game. The company must adapt to survive and thrive. You are young, Lori, and that is your advantage. You see the world differently than I do. Don't be afraid to make changes, even if they seem radical. Don't cling to the past just because that's the way it's always been done. The innovations I once introduced have now become tradition, and traditions have a tendency to become shackles if allowed to. At the same time, don't forget the fundamental principles on which our company was built. First, quality must never be sacrificed for profit. We don't just build buildings, we create spaces where people live, work, love, and raise their children. Their safety and comfort are paramount. Second, respect your employees. A company is not walls and paper, it is people. Take care of them and value their experience and dedication. But don't be afraid to make tough decisions when they are necessary. Third, remember your responsibility to society. Cardwell Construction has always been more than just a business. We helped shape Ashfield and participated in its life. Continue this tradition and look for ways to give something valuable back to society. And finally, about your mother. Veronica and I never really understood each other. Perhaps I was too demanding, too focused on the business. When your father died, I thought I was doing the right thing by taking responsibility for your education and future. But I didn't consider how it would affect Veronica, how it would widen the gap between us. I know your relationship isn't easy either, but remember, she is your mother, and beneath all the hurt and differences, there is love. If there is a chance for reconciliation after I'm gone, don't let it slip away. Life is too short for long-lasting conflicts with those we love. Lori, I have always been proud of you. Your intelligence, your determination, your ability to learn and grow. You remind me of your father. You have the same sparkle in your eyes when you talk about what truly fascinates you. I believe you will lead Cardwell Construction into the future with wisdom and vision. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. They are inevitable. Be afraid of not learning from them. I leave with peace of mind knowing that the company is in good hands. Your hands, with love, your grandfather, Garrett. Lori reread the letter several times, feeling tears running down her cheeks. Her grandfather's voice seemed to come from the pages, giving her last pieces of advice and expressing his final love. The next morning, she arrived at the office with renewed determination. The management team was waiting for her in the conference room to discuss the company's strategic plan for the next 5 years. "Good morning, everyone," Lori began, looking around the room. "Today we're not just talking about numbers and projects. We're talking about the future of Cardwell Construction, about what kind of company we want to be in 5, 10, 20 years. She opened a presentation showing new areas of development: green construction, smart homes, and the renovation of old neighborhoods in Ashfield. "The world is changing, and we must change with it," Lori continued. "But at the same time, we must remain true to the principles that have always defined our company: quality, respect for people, and responsibility to society." Seeing the nods of approval and interested glances, Lori felt a surge of confidence. The road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready for the challenge. With her grandfather's lessons in her heart and her own vision in her mind, she would lead the company into the future. That evening, when she returned home, Lori found Veronica in the winter garden, just as she had been on the first evening of their reconciliation. But this time, her mother did not look depressed. On the contrary, she glowed with an inner calm. "How was your day?" Veronica asked when her daughter joined her. "Productive," Lori smiled. "We're starting a new chapter in the company's history. And I think Grandpa would be proud." "I'm sure he would," Veronica nodded. "He always believed in you. Even when we disagreed, he was unwavering in one thing: you are the future of Cardwell Construction." They sat in comfortable silence, looking out at the garden, where the first spring flowers were beginning to peek through the ground. It was a new beginning, for the company, for their relationship, for both of them. Lori said, "Grandpa left me a letter. He wrote about you too, about how he regretted that you never really understood each other." "He was a complicated man," Veronica said thoughtfully. "But I never doubted that he loved us. It's just, he didn't always know how to show it. Like all of us," Lori added, taking her mother's hand. "But we have time to learn." Veronica squeezed her daughter's hand in response, and there was more understanding and forgiveness in that gesture than any words could express. There was a lot of work ahead of them, on the company, on their relationships, on themselves. But at that moment, in the quiet winter garden of the Cardwell family home, both women felt that the hardest part was behind them. A new chapter had begun, and they would write it together,